My husband said we needed to make economies and buy fewer things for ourselves, but when I checked his phone, I discovered he was buying expensive gifts for his mistress. When I asked him about it, he told me I was overreacting and that I was misunderstanding the situation. Mark and I had always been a team. We'd been married for 5 years, and in that time, we built a life together that I thought was solid, one based on mutual respect, trust, and shared dreams. We supported each other through everything, from career changes to personal struggles. Our connection felt strong, and we always communicated openly about our goals. So when Mark started suggesting we tighten our budget and make more sacrifices for our future, I thought it was just another part of our shared vision. I never imagined it would lead me down a path where I'd question everything I thought I knew about him. Mark and I had always been the kind of couple who made decisions together. We had built a life that felt secure, or at least, that's what I thought. Over the past few months, Mark started bringing up the idea of tightening our finances. At first, I didn't think much of it. We'd always been responsible with our money, and saving for the future seemed like a good idea. He talked about setting a strict budget, cutting down on luxuries, and even taking a break from buying anything extra for ourselves. I didn't mind at first. After all, we both worked hard, and the idea of having more financial freedom down the road sounded appealing. Mark was always the more practical one, the planner who liked to think ahead, while I was a little more spontaneous. It worked for us. But soon, his focus on cutting back started to feel more intense. Every time we went out to dinner or I mentioned buying something small for the house, he would remind me of our budget and how we needed to be more careful with our spending. It didn't take long for me to start feeling like I was walking on eggshells around him, constantly aware of every little purchase I made. It started to feel like we were constantly sacrificing things, and for what? Mark seemed so fixated on the future that it was as though he'd forgotten how to enjoy the present. I didn't mind being frugal, but it was beginning to feel like he was policing my every move. It was no longer just about saving, it was about avoiding any kind of enjoyment or indulgence, no matter how small. I could tell something was off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. One night, we were sitting on the couch after dinner, and Mark was scrolling through his phone, deep in thought. I was flipping through a magazine when I happened to glance at him. There was something different about the way he was acting, a kind of nervous energy I hadn't seen before. He was scrolling through a series of messages, and for some reason, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I tried to ignore the feeling, but as I looked closer, I noticed something that made my heart stop. His phone buzzed with a notification from a name I didn't recognize. I tried to brush it off, but I couldn't help myself. I glanced at the screen and saw that it was a message from someone named Sarah. The message read, "Can't wait to see you this weekend. I've got a surprise for you. Zoxo." I froze, unsure of what I was seeing. Was I overreacting? It could be anyone, right? But something in my gut told me to dig deeper. Mark had always been so protective of his phone, never letting me near it unless he was showing me something. It wasn't like him to be secretive, but lately, I had noticed him acting more distant. There had been moments when he would leave the room to take calls, and he would never mention who they were from. I tried to tell myself it was just work, but now, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was off. I knew I shouldn't, but I picked up his phone. I couldn't help myself. My hands were shaking as I unlocked it. The messages between Mark and Sarah were not casual. They were full of flirtation, plans to meet up, and even photos of things I didn't even want to imagine. As I scrolled, my stomach churned. There were details about gifts, about dates, and about intimate plans that I couldn't ignore. It was clear now, Mark was seeing someone else. My heart raced as I put the phone down, my mind spinning. How had I missed this? How had I been so blind to the signs? And worse, how could he hide something like this from me, especially after everything we'd built together? It felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. I felt sick, betrayed, and confused all at once. How could the man I trusted with my life be hiding something like this? How had I let myself get to this point? I didn't know what to do next. Part of me wanted to confront him immediately, but another part of me was terrified of what the truth might reveal. What if I was wrong? What if I had misunderstood the situation? But deep down, I knew I couldn't ignore it. The evidence was right there in front of me. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with 1,000 questions. I couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight. How could I have missed the signs? Had Mark been hiding this from me all along? The more I thought about it, the more everything began to fall into place, the way he'd been acting distant, the way he'd been fixated on saving money when he clearly had enough to spend on gifts for someone else. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something had to give. The next morning, I couldn't bring myself to say anything to Mark. I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of the truth I had just uncovered. As we sat at the breakfast table, he was acting as if everything was normal, chatting about work, asking about my plans for the day. But all I could think about were the messages, the pictures, and the thought of him buying expensive gifts for someone else while telling me we had to cut back on our own spending. I could barely look at him. How could he sit there, pretending nothing was wrong? My mind kept racing. The gifts he had bought, luxury watches, designer handbags, none of it made sense. He had been so adamant about saving, about pinching pennies, and yet he was splurging on someone who wasn't me. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about money. It was about betrayal. It was about a side of Mark I had never seen before. That afternoon, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to let him lie to me again. I waited until he came home from work, and then, with my heart pounding in my chest, I confronted him. I had rehearsed what I wanted to say, but the words stuck in my throat when I saw him walk through the door, looking the same as always. "Mark," I said, my voice shaky but determined. "We need to talk." He looked at me with a raised eyebrow, as if he had no idea what was coming. "What about?" "About Sarah," I said, my words cutting through the air like a knife. His face went pale, and I saw the flicker of panic in his eyes. "What do you mean?" "I saw the messages," I continued, not backing down. "I saw the gifts, Mark. I saw everything." For a moment there was silence. His eyes darted around the room, as if searching for a way out, a way to deny it. But I could see the guilt written all over his face. "It's not what you think," he said, his voice weak, trying to backpedal. "Not what I think?" I echoed, my anger rising. "You've been buying her expensive gifts while telling me we can't afford anything. You've been sneaking around behind my back, and now you expect me to believe it's not what I think?" Mark ran a hand through his hair, his face flushed. "I didn't mean for it to get this far," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted to hurt you." But it was too late for apologies. "How long, Mark? How long has this been going on?" I demanded, my voice cracking with emotion. He hesitated, clearly torn, but finally, he let out a long breath. "A few months," he admitted. "It just happened. I never meant for it to go this far." I could hardly breathe as the words sank in. A few months? He had been living a double life for months, all while pretending everything was fine with me. I had trusted him with everything, and he had shattered it in an instant. "Why?" I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop it. "Why her? Why didn't you just talk to me?" Mark's face softened, and for a moment, I saw the man I thought I knew. "I don't know," he said, his voice filled with regret. "I made a mistake. I never wanted to hurt you, but I don't know how to fix this." I stood there, frozen, unable to comprehend what he was saying. There was no way back from this, no way to unhear the truth. The man I had loved for so long was no longer the man standing in front of me. The silence that followed Mark's confession was deafening. I stood there, feeling like the world had been ripped out from under me. His words hung in the air, and I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. He had admitted it, and yet there was still this eerie calm in him, as if he thought a simple apology would fix everything. I didn't know how to respond. I had always thought that if we ever faced a problem in our relationship, we'd work through it together. But this? This wasn't something we could just talk through. The trust had been shattered beyond repair. And yet, Mark kept trying to explain himself, his voice tinged with desperation. I never meant for it to happen this way, he said again, running his hands through his hair. I was just confused. Things at home weren't great, and I found someone who understood me. I could barely listen to him. Someone who understood you? I repeated, my voice shaking. What about me, Mark? I thought I was the one who understood you. I thought we were building a life together. He stepped closer, his eyes pleading. We were, but I wasn't happy. I thought maybe it was just a phase, but then it got out of control. I didn't know how to stop it. The more he spoke, the more I realized how little he understood what he had done. It wasn't just about him being confused. It wasn't about some fleeting moment of weakness. It was about a betrayal that ran deep, one that involved lying, sneaking around, and keeping secrets. He had been making plans with someone else while I was left in the dark, believing everything was fine. And the worst part? The worst part was that he had been buying her the things he told me we couldn't afford, luxury gifts, vacations, nights out, all while making me feel guilty for spending even a little on myself. I stepped back, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. I can't do this, Mark. I can't keep pretending like everything is okay, when you've been lying to me this whole time. He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Please, just let me fix this, he begged. I'll do anything. I'll stop seeing her. We can go to counseling, we can. But his words didn't matter anymore. I couldn't believe a single promise he made. His actions had spoken louder than anything he could say now. No, I said, my voice firm. I can't trust you anymore. You've crossed a line that I can't come back from. Mark's face crumpled, and for the first time in this entire conversation, I saw guilt and regret in his eyes. But it was too late for that. Please, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. Sorry doesn't fix this. Sorry doesn't change the fact that you've been living a lie. You've been buying her everything you promised we'd save for, while I've been here, believing in us. And now I don't know who you are anymore. I turned away, unable to look at him any longer. I needed space, time to process everything that had just come to light. My heart ached, but I knew I couldn't stay in a marriage built on lies and deceit. The life I thought I knew had crumbled, and all I could do now was try to pick up the pieces. The days that followed were a blur. Mark begged for forgiveness, sent countless messages, and even showed up at my work unannounced, hoping to talk things through. But no matter how much he pleaded, I couldn't erase the image of him with her, buying her the things he'd promised we couldn't afford. The truth had broken something inside me that couldn't be fixed with words. I moved out of our shared apartment a week later, leaving him behind in the life we had built together. Every corner of that place felt like a reminder of what had been shattered. I couldn't stop thinking about the woman he had been so eager to please, the gifts, the lies. What had she been to him that I wasn't? How had he been able to hide it all for so long? It was in those quiet moments, when I sat alone with my thoughts, that the weight of it all truly hit me. Mark wasn't just unfaithful to me, he had betrayed everything we stood for. The trust we had worked so hard to build was gone, and in its place was a gaping hole. I had been living in a fantasy, believing that we were partners, that we shared the same values. But I had been blind to the truth that he was capable of lying, of betraying me, in the worst way possible. I spent the next few months focusing on myself, rediscovering who I was without him. I spent time with friends who supported me, went on trips I had always wanted to take, and found solace in my own company. Slowly, I began to rebuild my life, piece by piece. Mark continued to reach out, trying to explain himself, but the truth was, I didn't need his explanations anymore. I had learned everything I needed to know. The man I thought I loved had never really been who I thought he was. And now, I was learning to love myself again, without the lies, without the deceit. In the end, I realized that sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones that teach you your own strength. And while I may have lost him, I had gained something far more valuable, the ability to move forward, free from the weight of betrayal.